We might
announced
catch it.
or
We might
not.
catch a sound or two, depending
Yeah.
on how angry she gets.
Well, she's always welcome. So we've got a good show lined up for you today. We've got the Eldritch Moon first impression. So this is I've got to do 3 drafts and a couple of sealeds. Luis has been doing the research and stuff for the Pro Tour and all of that. So we're going to bring you kind of our first idea, some of the cards that have really stood out, some of the mechanics and things today, and also we're going to do multiple crack-a-packs to get that flow going for you to get an idea of how these packs actually break down. Before we get into all that, of course, I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by channelfireball.com. If you need Eldritch Moon, go to channelfireball.com. They're going to have Eldritch Moon in stock for you. You're going to be able to find booster boxes that you can buy, get some drafts together with your friends. You can buy individual packs if you want to get some Shadows over Innistrad with your Eldritch Moon so that you can do the current draft format. And of course, if you need to sell your cards, you can sell them to Channel Fireball. And hey, this is a good time to do it because if you do it, you're going to get 30% back if you do it for store credit. And of course, you can use that store credit on these boosters. So if you're ready to get your draft on, this is a great time to cash in some of those old rares from Shadows or other sets and turn them into booster packs. Of course, you can also find a host of awesome free content every single day over there on Channel Fireball. Videos, articles, podcasts from some of the best players in the world, all with the goal of helping you improve at Magic, just like we are on the show. Also, show brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's right. You can support the show directly. Patreon.com/limited resources is where you can find out more information about that. One of the things that you get if you are a patron of the show for any amount is you can submit questions for the question of the week. And we've got one here from Jordan. And Jordan says, hey guys, you know what? Actually, I'm going to rewind. One thing I wanted to mention, Luis, was that we got a question of the week about when people behave badly on Magic Online and also in real life as well. You know, the people that get salty and they get mad at you. And we had addressed how we approach that. You know, I tend to ignore them. But we neglected to mention one very important thing with that, which is that you, of course, can report these players through Magic Online. You can open up a ticket and you can report the players with bad behavior. And I encourage you to do that. They make the environment worse for everybody. And while from a personal perspective, I choose to ignore them, I also report them. If they go off on you, if they're making your experience crappy, report them, and they have teams of people at Wizards of the Coast that will review the cases and take any necessary action. So I don't know how I didn't remember to say that the first time around, but that is something that I believe in and that I think you should definitely do.
Oh yeah, definitely. I don't always report them. It depends on how obnoxious they are. But once it gets to a point where I think like, wow, this person would be really a bummer for a lot of people to run into, I do tend to report them.
Yeah, racial slurs, swearing, that kind of stuff gets instant reported. You know, I don't need any of that. Hey, if you're going to complain a little bit about like, hey, you got really lucky there or something, I just ignore them or whatever. Like that's just normal. All right. So Jordan Reagan says, hey guys, when it comes to deck building, whether it's in sealed or even constructed, how do you recognize a card that has a build around value versus just a good card? I'm still having trouble differentiating between the two. And I'm sure my decks are suffering because I think a card is one and that I should build around, but it's either low impact or it just isn't there. I don't have the cards to support it. And this happens more so in sealed for Jordan. He says, thank you. And I thought this is a good question coming off of the set review because I mean, we have a whole entire category just for these build around cards. And so I thought, you know, we'd answer the question, what are the keys? What are the hallmarks that we look for in a build around card versus a standalone card, if you will?
It's kind of interesting. There's a really wide range of build around cards. So it's not, I can't give you a rule that says like, if it meets this requirement, it's a build around. But at its core, a build around card is a card that does way more powerful things or better things when combined with a specific theme or set of cards or anything like that. Because if it just does some powerful things by itself, then, well, clearly it's just a great card. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't do powerful things, it's not worth building around. So you need the upside to be there in order to really call it a build around card. So there are, a lot of cards like this, like card that give you a bonus the more zombies you have, that's mm-hmm. a build around for zombies. A card that gives you a bonus the more clues you have, that's a build around for clues. So look for cards that look for specific types of cards. And if a card is generally good, regardless of what you pair it with, it's not a build around.
Right, exactly. Now, the interesting part for that, right, the real subtlety, because I think that some of them fall into more clear groups, but there's some really interesting ones that kind of skirt that line where you see text about zombies, for example, right? Like what is the Dark Salvation, right?
Right, the black XX,
yeah.
Put X zombies in a play, then give a creature -X the number of zombies you control. Yeah, that's a good example because I would not call that a zombie build around
It's
because that
not.
card's just great.
Yeah.
You just cast the card and it works.
Exactly, but you might look at that and say, "Oh, well, this card wants me to have zombies, so it's a zombie build around, and so if I don't have zombies, I'm not going to play it." And you'd be making a big mistake there. So, I think that the key is to look at the subtleties. And you and I, Luis, like to talk about floors and ceilings for cards, right? Where the floor is, well, what's the minimum I'm getting on average here, and the ceiling is, well, how good could this be in like a maybe not the ideal case, but in a good case scenario. And, if you look at a card that has what we call a relatively high floor, meaning that your worst case isn't that bad, like Dark Salvation, for example, your worst case is actually not bad at all. It's actually pretty good. Then you probably can take that out of the build around camp. But look, Dark Salvation pays you off for having zombies. The more the merrier. That's great, but it doesn't need them, right? And that's the difference. If you look at a card that says, like, that does nothing unless you control zombies,
Well, a good example would be Thalia's Lieutenant.
There you go.
Where, it's just 2 mana 1/1. When you play it, gives all your humans ++1 counter, and then when you play a human, it gets a ++1 counter. If you put this in a deck without humans, it's a 2 mana 1/1. It's terrible. The floor is very low. Of course, Thalia's Lieutenant is such a great card because the ceiling's so high and doesn't take a ton of humans to be good enough. But
exactly,
that's the example of a card that you wouldn't put in your deck unless you had other humans.
Yeah, another one out of Eldritch Moon is Stensia Banquet, right? Which is the 2 in a red sorcery. It deals damage to target opponent equal to the number of vampires you control, and you draw a card. The floor on Stensia Banquet is actually not that high. It's 2 in a red sorcery, draw a card, which is pretty bad. That's not a card you'd want to play in your deck ever, without the upside. Now, it is more of a build around, right? Like if you've got literally all vampires in your deck, well, you might play a Stensia Banquet. I mean, we actually didn't really like it that much, but that's
the ceiling's not very high.
The ceiling's unfortunately not that high.
Whoever built this building built it way too close to the ground.
Yeah.
The floor is like underground. The ceilings, you have to like crouch to get in there. So.
Yeah. But this is the type of card that you would recognize as a build around, right? Where you're not playing it at all unless you build around it. And even then, yeah, maybe you are, maybe you're not, but you're certainly not playing it without. So there's some hallmarks to look for you there, Jordan. Hopefully that helps you sort out what are the build arounds and what aren't. It is a subtle art. And this, I think, is another way that, you and I, Luis, when we do the set reviews, we always kind of remind people to listen to what we talk about more than just the letter grade. And this is a great example of that. Because, a lot of these might just get a build around grade. And it's like, okay, well, I don't know. I guess I just build around it. All right, let's do some crack-a-packs, Luis. Let's get into this. This is a fun part. Week 1 crack-a-packs. I love this. All right. So we've got Ingenious Scob is our first card. It's a card I like quite a bit, actually. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/3 with prowess, and you can pay blue to give it +1/-1 until end of turn. It's a zombie as well.
Ingenious Scob is really, really good.
It's just super solid, right?
I'll talk about it later when we talk about the best blue commons because this is actually Water Courser, if you remember that card from various core sets. And Water Courser is all solid, but it has prowess. So it just has this additional ability, which, funnily enough, gets used very well when you get +1/-1 too. Totally. So this threatens to hit for 5 or 6 damage in the middle to late game. Even just attacking as a 3/4 on turn 4 if you play a spell, or just attacking as a 2/3 and threatening to be a 3/4 or a 4/3 or a 5/2, depending on how your opponent blocks. Just makes it really hard for your opponent to deal with, and it's a lot of stats for not a lot of cost.
Yeah. I think Ingenious Scob is just very, very solid, right?
This is not a build around. You look at the prowess and you're like, wow, I need a lot of spells. This card actually, the stats and the ability are good enough already. You'll put this in a deck with 5 spells and you'll be happy.
Yep, totally. Strange Augmentation. This card's so bad. It's the black enchant creature aura, and the creature gets +1/+1. But if you've got Delirium, it gets +2/+2 additionally.
So it's bad without Delirium and mediocre with Delirium, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, if this was just straight up black, my creature gets +3 something. Even then, I don't think I'd be too excited about it.
Well, black +3/+3 would be really good.
I tried to augment it from +3/+3 to +3 something because I don't think that they would do +3/+3.
Well, technically augmenting makes it better, right? I think so. You actually kind of de-augmented it.
Okay, whatever. Does augment mean better?
I think so.
I thought it just meant change.
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, no.
I'm not 100% sure, but
Every time you've corrected me, you've been right. So I'm just gonna go
that is
with
true.
it.
So I'm just trying to set a precedent so you don't look it up later. But the problem is, obviously this card is not good
Yeah.
because the base rate is bad, and by the time you get delirium, the other rate isn't that good either. Because
No.
on turn 7, 1 black +3/+3 loses a lot of its punch. So you
Yep.
really just not have this card in your deck.
Nope, it's bad. We gave it an F, in fact. Backwoods Survivalists is next. It's 3 and a green for a 4/3 human warrior, and with Delirium, it gets trample and +1/+1.
I'm a fan.
I am too.
This is a Brood
it's held
Hunter
its own.
worm.
Yes, with upside, yeah.
And later in the game, becoming a 5/4 trample is pretty reasonable.
It is.
It also threatens to do it at like instant speed if you have some tricks.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have a way to put an instant in your graveyard, or even a way to like sack a land in the middle of combat somehow. Like it's the kind of card that gives you a decent amount of stats to begin with, and then has a little bit of a minor upside. So it's fine.
Yeah, it's also a human, which sometimes matters. Wailing Ghoul is next. It's 1 and a black for a 1/3 zombie, and when it enters the battlefield, you mill the top 2 cards of your library.
Screeching Scob got a +1 or -1/+2, so it's 2 mana 1/3 now that mills you for 2, which is I think reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not good, but there are some decks that A want a zombie and B want to mill themselves, and this at least has the stats that go better with those abilities because.
Agreed.
Screeching Scob as a 2/1 was not a card you really wanted in most decks, whereas this is black, so it's heavier on Delirium, and it's more defensive, which helps. So I think you're going to play this more often than you would Scob, but it's worse than the Survivalist or the Scob, or the Ingenious Scob, rather.
Bloodbriar is next. This is the 2 and a green for a 2/3. It's a plant elemental, and whenever you sacrifice another permanent, it gets a +1/+1 counter.
It's pretty sweet in a clue deck, but
Indeed. Yeah, this was actually when Owen and I went over this card, we forgot about clues.
Oh, I know, that's why I mentioned that, actually.
Yeah, that's really funny. And we didn't mention it, but at the same time, like looking back on it, I wish we would have mentioned it, but it's also not a major factor because there's only 1 pack worth of clues. So
it really isn't. You're not going to get 7 clue cards.
Right.
Like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But that is a cool synergy.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Bloodbriar is very mediocre. Like I've yet to see a counter get put on it. Borrowed Malevolence. This one's been pretty good. It's black for an instant with Escalate 2, and it gives a creature +1/+1 and a creature -1/-1 if you want to do both. It's 3 mana. It basically just makes combat very difficult for your opponent. There's not a lot of blocking scenarios that you don't win with Borrowed Malevolence, in your hand.
No, I mean if you think about it as a +2/+2 swing, which it is by itself, right? If you're just keeping the -1 on their creature and the +1 on yours in the same combat, then that's already like decent, not great. But the fact that you can split it up means that you can pick up a nice little 2-for-1 every now and then. Like
Definitely.
Your 3/3 bashes theirs and you kill their 2/1 that's not even involved in combat. Or, your 2/2s attack into their 2/2s and you win both fights. So playing around this card is going to be something that's going to test your skills, though I think this is a touch below the other good commons. I'm still on Ingenious Scob at this point.
I like it too. Yeah, the other cool part about Borrowed Malevolence, it just kills something sometimes. Like just kill your, and I'll tell you what, Luis, sample size is small, but so far it seemed to me that there's quite a few 1 toughness creatures out there that I actually want to kill. Like
that would make this card go from like what looks like a mid-tier playable to like kind of like a high-tier playable.
Yeah. This next one's one I really have my eye on. It's Enlightened Maniac. It's 3 and a blue for an 0/2 human, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 3/2 Eldrazi.
Yeah, one of the themes is there's a couple 3 or 4 different cards, 5 different cards that make 3/2 Eldrazi, and so it's interesting. This is 2 bodies in 1 card, which if you have ways to sacrifice them, that helps. At the very worst, it's a chump blocker, right? So it's like a 3/2 that gains you some life if you chump block. I think this card's fine. I think it's slightly better than a 4 mana 3/3, which is a card I'm not excited to put in my deck, but I will play sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that Enlightened Maniac is going to take its place as probably the premier Emerge enabler.
It does leave behind a great body for Emerge.
Yeah, and it's a type that you want. 4 mana means that the next turn you can Emerge basically any of the almost any of the Emerge cards, like for good value, because they're all 7 or 8 in that range. There's one that's 6 that doesn't seem to really matter. Bold Impaler. Do not like this one very much. This is red for a 1/2 Vampire Knight, and you can pay 2 and a red to give it +2/+0 until end of turn.
Look, they can keep printing these 1/2s that get +2/+0, and I'm going to keep having to second pick them and be very angry about it. But
what was it? Bellows Lizard?
Ember Eye Wolf was one.
Ember Eye Wolf was one. Oh yeah, right. At the Pro Tour, I remember now.
Yeah, there's even a video that's very bizarre detailing it. But yeah,
Indeed.
Impaler is just not very good. The problem is spending 3 mana to trade up. Essentially, like you're gonna end up like you might think like, oh man, I traded my 1 drop for their 2 drop. It's like no, you traded 1 drop plus 3 mana for their 2 drop. That is no longer a good deal.
Indeed. This next one's decent. Steadfast Cathar. It's 1 and a white for a 2/1 human soldier, but when it attacks, it gets +0/+2, so it attacks as a 2/3.
This card's solid. If
It's
you're
very
attacking,
solid.
2 mana 2/3 is a great attacker.
Totally.
I don't know if you remember the ghoul that 2 mana 2/3 comes into play tapped from Origins. That was a very solid card, and this is
Oh, I
slightly
do
worse
remember.
on defense, but this does attack in the same way, and that was a great attacker.
Yeah, I think this card's really solid. I think this is going to be one of the go-to 2 drops. It's a common, so you're going to see them around, especially in the humans aggro deck. All right, uncommons. Actually, I'll look at our double face card, and it is Midnight Scavengers. So that's of course the 4 and a black for a 3/3 human rogue. When it enters a battlefield, you can return a creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to your hand, and then it melds with Graft Rats to become Chittering Host. So there's that guy. Decent
I like
card.
Midnight Scavenger. I
Yeah, it's
think
pretty
that's
good, right? Yeah.
I'm still on the Scob train. I think Ingenious Scob is just so efficient.
Yes, I agree. Let's see. I like the Scob and Borrowed Malevolence are the 2 cards that stand out to me here. So uncommons. Let's see if we can change your mind. Fury Blade Vampire. This is the 1 and a red for a 1/2 Vampire Berserker with Trample. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can discard a card. If you do, it gets +3/+0 until end of turn. It becomes a 4-powered 2-drop with Trample as well.
If you have enough madness going on, this card seems like it's got a decent upside because instead of paying a cost to get a 2 mana 4/2, you're getting a 2 mana 4/2 with an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
But in a normal deck, like you put this in your red green deck, if you attack and discard a card and then they block with a 2/2 or a 3/3, I'm not very happy about
I'm
that.
pretty unhappy to
So
do.
I would not want to take this early, though I could see it being a very critical card for my deck later in the draft.
That's my exact take on it right now, too. I think that Fury Blade Vampire is the type of card that is going to be an absolute all-star in the right build, and everybody else doesn't really want it. Unsubstantiate, 1 and a blue, instant, return target spell or creature to its owner's hand.
My guess is that people slightly overrate this card.
Definitely.
Because you do end up down a card. Like remember, this isn't a counter spell where you end up trading 1 for 1. This isn't a removal spell. That being said, it is pretty flexible and cheap, so I would imagine at least at the start of the format, I'm always going to put this in my deck and see how it goes. My guess is still worse than the Scob, though. The Ingenious Scob is quite the card.
I think so, too. Yeah, I'm going to also run an Unsubstantiate, but I outlined in the set review what I like about cards like this and how I try to play them. And maybe we'll get more into that. I actually have an idea for a show topic, a level up down the line, Luis, I'll talk to you about when we're off the air that might touch on that kind of subject as well. Ride Down is our last uncommon. This is the red-white instant. Destroy target blocking creature. Creatures that were blocked by that creature this combat gain trample until end of turn.
Yeah, reprint from Khan's block.
Mm-hmm.
Ride Down is a good card if you're red-white because red-white decks are just going to be aggressive most of the time.
Do we want to be red-white this early in the draft?
That's the thing is I still don't like first pick and gold cards, especially since, if you have Ingenious Scob at about a 7, maybe a 6, Ride Down is like a half point or maybe a full point higher, but a gold card, and that's not enough to make me change my mind.
Me neither. Nope.
It's just not. You're paying too much to take a gold card there. So, all right, let's hope the rare can change our mind here.
Oh, it's going to change your mind. This card is.
Is it going to blow my mind?
No, but it's fantastic. I love this card. It's Crypt Breaker.
Oh, yeah, well, I do like the card.
We did it. It's black for a 1/1 zombie. You can pay 1 and a black, tap it, and discard a card to make a 2/2 zombie. And you can tap 3 untapped zombies you control at any time to draw a card and lose a life. I'm a huge fan of Crypt Breaker. On the set review, I compared it to Pack Rat. It isn't as good as Pack Rat.
Yeah, maybe let's dial it down a bit from there.
Well, no, what I mean is I didn't say it was crap. I didn't say it was Pack Rat. I said I compared it to Pack Rat in the way that it feels when you play it. I would rather have Pack Rat in my deck, but this card is excellent. Like, this is really a top tier rare in my mind. This thing completely takes over the game if left unchecked, and it hits from 2 very good angles in the sense that you're building out a board state without having to spend very much mana, and it can start getting you ahead on cards while you do it. And I would windmill Crypt Breaker out of this pack.
Yeah, I think Crypt Breaker is great. You don't even have to worry about combining with madness cards. Like, yeah, that's great if you madness it, but
yeah,
just put this in your black deck, and it will, like you said, take over the game. even without the second ability, even the ability to just change lands into 2/2s is already like pretty good. But the fact that once you accumulate a couple zombies, you start refilling your hand, like that. Yeah, it's an
insane
absurd card.
for no mana. You're just
Yep.
like go. They can't attack into your board of 3/2/2s that are pretty expendable, and then you're just like end step, draw a card, and you only lose one life. So you can do that pretty judiciously, and then boom, your hands reloaded, you got the engine rolling, and things really get away from your opponent. The thing that reminded me of Pack Rat most when I played this card, I haven't had a chance to play it already, was just that it felt like other cards didn't matter anymore. Like, when you played a Pack Rat and you drew your card for the turn and you like instinctually look at what it does, but you're like, whatever, I'm just activating my Pack Rat again. Like, that's the best thing I can do. It doesn't really matter what card I have in my hand.
Yeah,
Crypt Breaker felt like that to me.
I feel like it's not always going to be that way because making a ground 2/2 isn't going to like beat a 3/3 flyer.
Mm-hmm.
But the second ability, letting you draw cards, means
That's
unless
the
your
thing.
life total is getting pressured, yeah, you'd rather just make a zombie because that just turns into more cards.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, I might be skewing it a little bit because I played it on turn 1 and I'm just like, okay, what should I do? I'm like, play a land, make a zombie. That part was easy. But then on turn 3, I'm like, should I play a 3-drop? And I'm like, well, no, now I'm one zombie away from having the option to start drawing cards because Crypt Breaker itself is a zombie. And if you want to forego using the ability for a turn to like cast a spell, you can tap Crypt Breaker and the 2 zombie friends to make to draw a card as well. The card's stupid. Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm windmilling it here. All right, let's get into this next pack. Bailed out by Crypt Breaker.
Yeah, whoever gets that pack like third is not going to be super happy.
No, and and it's good. We both were a big fan of Ingenious Ska, but even then, like, I don't think I'd be super thrilled if that was my first pick.
No, I'm not juiced to first pick Ingenious Gob. I just think the card's good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get into this. We've got Distemper of the Blood. Not planning on playing this one much. It's 1 and a red for a sorcery. The creature gets +2/+2 and trample, and it does have madness for just red.
Yeah, but I like Senseless Rage from Innistrad for Shadows because if you madness, that was the +2/+2 aura. If you madness it out, it was great. Sometimes you could just cast it on your 1-drop. This just has lower, like way higher lower upside, and the downside of when it just casts sorcery is just heinous.
That's so bad. I know. That's the thing, is that like you're supposed to feel like you're kind of breaking it if you play it for the madness cost, and you're just like, well, I'm getting like a decent combat trick, right?
Yeah,
like,
you're not really getting that much out of it.
it's not even a blowout. All right, here's a good one. Sigardian Priest. This is the 1 and a white 1/2 human cleric, and you can pay a mana and tap it to tap target non-human creature. I like that card.
Yeah, Guardian Priest is just a solid card. You're going to put it in any white deck, and you're going to be happy with it. So
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to first pick this card a decent amount over the course of the format.
One thing of note here with the Priest as well is that it does have 2 toughness. And as I've mentioned, I've started to notice a pretty good number of cards that have 1 toughness that you actually, that are real cards worth killing. And the reason I bring it up is because our next card is Borrowed Malevolence again. And the Priest dodges those type of effects, which is pretty important. Because they could have easily made this a 1/1. So there's a Borrowed Malevolence.
But then it wouldn't be an Abyssinian Priest, because it's a strict reprint of Abyssinian Priest.
True. Woodcutter's Grit. This is an interesting one, I think. It's 2 and a green for an instant, and target creature gets +3/+3 and gains hexproof until end of turn.
What happens when you cast it on Stoic Builder? You get an additional bonus of some kind?
I don't know. No, it doesn't say you do. Maybe they meld into something.
Yeah, I feel like this should have had meld with that. But anyways.
What about the Logger? Hinterland Logger?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a 3-mana combat trick, which is, you're getting to the point where I'm not as interested. Because
see, me too.
once you get to 3 mana, you're not going to get a significant mana advantage. Like one of the great parts about something like Strength of Arms, the 1 mana +2/+2, is on turn 4, you Strength of Arms, your 3-drop beats their 3-drop, and you play another 3-drop, you're up a significant amount of mana. When you use Woodcutter's Grit, you're probably just using your whole turn's worth of mana on it, and that's just not great. Because combat tricks are intrinsically a little bit risky because they give you the opportunity to get blown out by a 2-for-1.
Totally. And the interesting part I mentioned on the top that I thought this card was kind of cool or interesting to evaluate is that, I mean, they do give you what you want, right? Like a combat trick that can protect your creature from any spell and also makes your creature win virtually any combat. That's what you want out of a combat trick, right? I mean, it does deliver. It's just, they charge you, right? I mean, man, if this was +2/+2 hexproof for 2 mana, you would be all over it, right? But that 3 mana really does put it in a much different category. And I'm not a big fan of it. I don't think it's bad. I think that you can play it, but yeah, it does miss a little bit for me too.
You're just not gonna play it very often. They're
Right.
just they're just better combat
It's
droids.
just hard to justify. Faith Bearer Paladin is next. Solid card, 4 and a white for a 3/4 with lifelink. It's a human knight.
Yeah, it's a reasonable curve filler. Most decks are going to want like a 5 drop, maybe two, and this is human, so
Yep.
you can end up putting this in your deck if you're short on the high end. I don't think it's near the best of the high end cards, but
No,
it's the kind of card where if you want a big beater and you have especially some equipment or auras, it's a great thing to put those on.
yeah, I like the Sigardian Priest better than the Faith Bearer
Oh
Paladin.
yeah, that's not, I don't think, remotely close.
Agreed. I think the Faith Bearer Paladin's ultimately quite replaceable.
Yeah, even if we weren't looking at the power levels so closely, where a Sigardian Priest is way ahead, it's
Yeah.
also a 5 drop versus a 2 drop. Like, you'd
Yeah,
much rather
that's-
start your draft with a 2 drop.
Exactly. Again, 5 drops are just replaceable. You don't need that many of them. Next, Swords to Plowshares, anybody?
I know you're going to say.
Spontaneous Mutation. Blue for an aura with flash, enchant creature, and the creature gets -X/-0, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard.
Yeah, so for some context, when originally Innistrada's drafted, I called Sensory Deprivation, which is an aura that gives -3/-0, Swords to Plowshares. I would just always call it that. This is actually much closer to Swords to Plowshares, because this is an instant.
It is an
The other one
instant.
wasn't even an instant. And sometimes this will go like -6/-0, which is way closer than -3/-0.
Yeah, it is.
So
I think the card's pretty good.
yeah, it is a fine card. It's the kind of card that does have a risk of just being straight up dead, because if you have 0 to 2 cards in your graveyard, sometimes you're not going to do much with it. But late game, I mean, not only can this essentially stop a 5/5 from doing anything, sometimes you'll play it in combat so you just kill their creature and it's not even around as a blocker.
Yeah, that's probably the best use for it. Also, it's good against cards that like you aren't going to be blocking at all, right? A flyer or an evasive threat. Also, I have to say, like, even if it is just 2, like that does take care of a lot of, and remember, that's not static, right? Like at some point you can assume that another card or 2 will make it into your graveyard. But if they've got a 3/3 flyer, which is a reasonable threat, and you go, okay, Spontaneous Mutation it's now a 1-powered flyer, like you've really bought yourself a lot of time, and then the next card that hits the graveyard is going to nullify that. I think that 3 is kind of your cutoff point. Like once you get above 3, you're really happy, and I think that 3 is where you're like, okay, cool, and 2 or below you're like, I wish this would be a little better. But I don't know, I think Spontaneous Mutation is going to see a significant amount of play in
It's a
the
solid
control
card.
decks.
It doesn't stack well. If you have 3 in your deck, you've just reduced the number of cards that naturally go to your graveyard. So
Oh, I see what you're saying.
you kind of run
That's
into
interesting.
that sort of problem. But I do think it's a solid card.
Do you like it better than Sigardian Priest?
No.
I don't either.
I think Sigardian Priest is much better.
I think so too. Stencia Banquet is next. This is the one we talked about earlier with the build-arounds, the vampire card, and I think it's really bad.
It's just hard.
I don't even think you'd run it in your vampire deck.
Yeah, I just understand having this like elaborate banquet or party in a place with such a low ceiling. Like it just doesn't sound like the right place for that occasion. That's all.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to make it to the banquet RSVP.
Yeah.
Iron Rites Cleansing. This is a pretty boring, but whatever card. Yeah, so it's 2 and a white sorcery, exile target artifact or enchantment.
Straight up sideboard card.
Yep.
You tend not to first pick those.
All right, we're in the uncommons now, and we got some
Alrighty.
business right off the bat. Ruthless Disposal. This card's pretty savage. It's the 4 and a black sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you sacrifice a creature and discard a card, but they do pay you back. 2 target creatures each get -13/-13 until end of turn.
Yeah, this card, I'm going to have to play with this more to really get a good handle on it, because at base level, you're getting 3 for 2, right? You're
Yes.
losing this card plus the 2 cards to kill 2 creatures.
Mm-hmm.
But you might be trading up in mana, which is kind of nice. Like you get to kill their 2 best creatures. -13, -13 is almost assuredly enough to be able to do that. And then of course you have maybe delirium decks, like you're able to discard a land or some other type that's hard to get into your graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
So
Madness if you have a
inclination
ton of mana.
yeah, madness is hard because like you said, it costs 5. My inclination is that this is not much better than it's not like a premier removal spell, but it's the kind of card where having 1 in your deck is pretty good for the late game. Like this is a great card on turn 9 or something like that, because you'll have a bad creature, they'll have 2 good ones, and you'll have a random land in your hand.
Yeah.
But early on in the game, it's much worse than like murder. Of course, is just much better. 3 mana.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I don't remember if we mentioned in the set review or not about Ruthless Disposal, but it is not up to 2 target creatures. It is 2 target creatures. So if they only have 1 big threat, you are going to have to target one of your own creatures as well.
And if now we've changed it from a 3 for 2 to a 4 for 1. So
yeah, which I mean,
let's
look,
not do that.
it's an edge case, right? But like, I think that people, you're going to see somebody be like, oh, I'll just kill your one thing, and you're like, no, you need, and also you need 2 targets. Like, you cannot cast it if there's only 1 on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's almost as confusing as Dead Ringers, which is a card people should look up if they
do remember that one, yeah. Ruthless Disposal or Sigardian Priest?
I'm still on the Priest plan here.
Yeah, I'm actually on the Disposal. I'm ready to flush the Priest here for the Disposal.
I think that were this like a literal draft, and I was doing a draft right now, I would probably take Ruthless Disposal to see how it plays out, because I bias towards higher rarity cards on commons and rares early. But I think if somehow we had teleported to, the Pro Tour pack 1, pick 1, I would take the Priest.
Okay. Next uncommon is Blood Mist. This is the 3 and a red enchantment that gives, at the beginning of your combat on your turn, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn.
I think this card is good.
Yeah, I don't.
It seems like it gives you a pretty significant threat as long as you have anything with like 3 or more power in play.
That is true. That is very true.
But there is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, a thing called setup cost. And Blood Mist has a pretty reasonable setup cost.
It does indeed. Also, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's the quadrant theory, the most important quadrant being, of course, when you're behind. So Blood Mist really only slotting into an aggressive deck with high-powered creatures. It's pretty narrow, right? Because this does just stone nothing if you're behind. On board, if your opponent has good removal spells and can kind of take out, because I think one way I look at it is this, right? So you play 3 creatures, and then, turn 5 or 6, you play your Blood Mist, and you're like, okay, this is sweet. I've got 2 good targets for it and 1 mediocre target. And so you say, okay, at beginning of combat, and by the way, I mentioned this on the set review, but this is a big bonus of Blood Mist, is that it happens to the turn you play it too. So you first main phase Blood Mist, and then you go to combat, and it's going to trigger, which is very good. I mean, that is a big difference, not letting your opponent plan out what's about to happen to them. But then your opponent says, okay, you're going to target your 4-powered creature. All right, I'm going to use my removal spell to kill it, right? So they kill it, and then you don't get anything for your Blood Mist. And now you're looking at the board, and you're going to start getting kind of hot under the collar, because if they have anything to interact with that second tier down, let's say it's a 3-powered creature, you're kind of running out of targets for it quickly. And the hard part, of course, about it is that Blood Mist takes the slot of what could potentially be another threat. So, you only get to draw so many cards over the course of a game of Magic, and, this is potentially going to take one away. So I don't like it very much. I'm not planning on playing it. Until people start killing me with it, then I'm having it in the bench.
I don't think it's better than Sigardian Priest, to be clear, but if you're an aggressive deck with high power creatures, it feels like Blood Mist is a good high end. This is a good finisher.
How good is Sigardian Priest versus Blood Mist?
Sigardian Priest is quite good versus Blood Mist. They choose to give double strike and you tap it down. So There's a solution. Just give one of your humans double strike. Bam, I did it.
There you go. Next uncommon is Mourn Willow. This is one that you and I had as a preview card. Yeah, so it's the 1 green black 3/2 plant skeleton with haste, and if you've got Delirium, creatures with power 2 or less cannot block this turn. It's funny, we both thought this card was fine, and okay, it makes, it's a card that you would play if you were playing these colors, but I got to say, this is even lower on the spectrum for me than the Ride Down was in the first pack about being a gold card that I don't really feel like it's worth it to go into, so I wouldn't even really consider Mourn Willow here.
No, and this is the exact kind of card you'll take. This is the payoff card I see for being black green. You get a 7th pick Mourn Willow. Congratulations.
Yes, exactly. Right?
Because no one else should want this card. Oh, it's also a little more aggressive than I like for my Delirium cards. My Delirium decks don't tend to be super, super aggressive.
No, I mean, you were playing the Epitaph Golem and stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why is Mourn Willow? Is he blocking?
Well, now there's only 1 pack of shadows that you definitely have to first pick that Epitaph Golem. Right?
Yeah, because you weren't before. All right, so we've actually got 2 double face cards. One of them being a rare, as you may have deduced. So let's get into these. So we've got 2 rares and 1 non-rare, and our other double face card's an uncommon. So of our last 3 cards, we've got 2 rares and an uncommon. The uncommon is Grizzled Angler, which is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human. You can tap it to mill yourself for 2 cards. And then if there's a colorless creature card in your graveyard, you transform it into Grizzly Anglerfish, which is an Eldrazi fish. It's a 4/5 with an activated ability. Pay 6 mana, and creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able.
Grizzle Angler's interesting. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, if I don't have any colorless cards, any colorless creatures in my deck, do I want this card in my deck? And it's like, well, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
It does enable spontaneous mutation and it does enable delirium, but the blue decks don't tend to be that heavy on those anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If you do have a couple colorless cards, then, well, I mean, a 3-drop that turns into a 4/5 with a pretty relevant activated ability, that seems reasonable to me.
It does to me too. And, the key to remember here is that Grizzled Angler, meets the bar as just a playable creature, although it barely meets it. But to activate it does not cost any mana.
It skates over the bar. It gets clipped by it as it's jumping over, but
yeah. I mean, a 2/3 for 3 is not a card you'd really want to play. But like, if you're getting almost anything out of the tap ability, I think it's worth it, especially if you do have even just one colorless creature, but more even better. Remember, it also counts artifact creatures if you happen to have a couple of those in there. But it doesn't cost you any mana. You just tap it, and boom, it can become a 4/5 with like what's actually quite a powerful ability too. The come at me, bro ability when you've got a 4/5 to just gobble up creatures is actually quite nice. Like, it's a board changer. It really puts, your control deck opponent in a tough situation. And if your opponent's on a bunch of small creatures and is kind of waiting for their magmatic chasm or something, you're just like, gobble up a bunch of them. I don't know. I think the card has a lot of upside and the downside's not too low. But
it's not a huge downside.
Yeah, it's not a huge downside, but it wouldn't be a card you'd want to play. Out of the 3, though, I'm still on Ruthless Disposal. Though I will tell you, you will be changing your mind. And honestly, I don't know which direction to go because the 2 rares are both insane. Do you want the double faced or the non-double faced first? I'll
go with the double faced.
Okay, so this is Bruna the Fading Light.
All right.
Yeah, so very good. And I actually don't think it's the pick here either. It's 5 blue. Yeah, for a 5/7 Angel Horror legendary creature.
5 white.
Sorry, yes, 5 white. That's, by the way, a little foreshadowing. When you cast Bruna,
are we deep feeding? Is that what we're doing?
No. When you cast Bruna the Fading Light, you may return target angel or human creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Very powerful. In white, you're going to have a human or an angel often, not all the time, but a good percentage of the time, you're going to just get a free card. Doesn't matter how much it costs. You just get it back. It doesn't go back to your hand. It goes to the battlefield. And you've got a 5/7 with flying and vigilance. Now, it's also a meld card that becomes, this unbeatable meld. But unfortunately, she melds with Gisela the Broken Blade, which is a mythic rare. So that actually happening is something that's going to happen very infrequently. But Bruna does not care. She stands quite tall on her own. And, I ended up giving Bruna an A in the set review. And my thinking on it is that, once again, going back to quadrant theory, right? Like, I want a card that gets me out of a jam. And Bruna does a great job of getting me out of a jam. She's going to bring a 5/7 with flying, which is one of the best blockers I can think of. And then sometimes she's even going to bring back another creature that can block or help get me an advantage as well.
Yep, I have nothing bad to say about Bruna. I mean, she costs 7, so that's an upside. But she is expensive, but she's going to put tons of... probably at the very minimum, like, her 5/7 worth of stats plus a 2/2 or a 3/3. And sometimes it'll be more, as well as, having flying and vigilance. So Bruna's a great card. I'm kind of interested to see what you would take over here. There's definitely plenty of rares I would take over Bruna because, again, she does cost 7. But I agree with your grade of an A.
Yeah. All right. So I gave this card an A as well. It's Niblis of Frost.
Oh, yeah. Well, this card's absurd.
Yeah. So this is 2 blue for a 3/3 flying spirit with prowess, which is already fantastic. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to freeze an opponent's creature. So you can tap it down and then it doesn't untap during their next untap step. The thing is that, when you look at cards like Niblis of Frost and Bruna next to each other, this is a decision you rarely have to make, right? This is more of we're out at dinner and somebody says, hey, would you take Niblis of Frost or Bruna, right? And even though you look at it and you're like, well, that's not a decision I'll probably have to make in a draft because it's 2 rares, but it is possible, and we do have it here legit. The mana cost, right? Like, this whole discussion ends up boiling down to the mana cost. And for me, the Niblis of Frost is the slam dunk here over Bruna. And the reason for that is just there's a much, much higher percentage of games where I actually get to cast this card, right? And to me, that makes up for, even though Bruna is, more powerful on her own, 7 mana is just infinite higher than 4, and I would just take Niblis of Frost here.
I would certainly take Niblis. I think Niblis is just overall a better card. I think you're basically
Agreed.
when you're getting comparable power level for lower cost, like you said, it's just kind of a slam dunk.
It's
Niblis
just
is just an amazing card.
Yeah. So Niblis of Frost it is. Of course, I'll be setting these rares aside and putting them in the pile that we give away to our listeners via the Patreon. If you are on the Patreon, then you're automatically entered into these giveaways. I do them about once every month and a half once I get enough cards in the pile here. I've also got a foil Startled Awake here and an Enlightened Tutor from Eternal Masters that's in here, and it's going to be joined by the rares from this. Okay, let's get into some high level discussion here, right? This is week 1. I've only done a few drafts. You've only been able to poke around. This isn't the kind of thing where we start making conclusions. This is more the kind of thing of like, well, what are you seeing? What are some of the big picture ideas? So what I thought we would do, Luis, is start to look over some of the top commons in each color and the uncommons in each color, and just sort of the ones that have stood out to us, right? We'll know for sure where these rank and how we feel about them in 3 weeks or whatever. But for now, I can start to look at the ones that have been maybe standouts and that kind of thing. So I was thinking we'd start with white. And the ones that jumped out to me were Choking Restraints, which is the new pacifism effect in white. And then the Sigardian Priest that we saw. And then the honorable mention, one that's kind of stood out to me maybe a little more than I thought at first, is Ironclad Slayer, which is the one that lets you buy back an aura or an equipment from your graveyard, and it's also just a 3/2 for 3 mana.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Choking Restraints and Sigardian Priest as the number 1 and 2. Not necessarily that order. My guess is Choking Restraints is slightly higher, but
Okay.
that's
my guess too, but I don't know for sure. Yeah.
If you were to actually choose to have like 3 copies of these cards in your deck, you probably want like 2 Restraints, 1 Priest, just to mix it up a little, because they're very, very close in power level. But they're both removal spells. They're just great removal spells, and maybe some humans' decks would rather have the Priest if they have a bunch of equipment they just want on their body. But either way, you're taking these 2 over all the other white commons. I think I'm pretty confident that that's just going to stand. Like that, I don't think we need to play for another month to figure that out. Ironclad Slayer is an interesting one. I think the jury's still out on that one. Like, if it's a reliable 3 mana 3/2 that draws you a card, that sounds awesome. But I don't know how often that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's one that's really like there's a flag. I'm like, that card has something going. People have been raving about it, so I'm definitely going to keep my eye on it. In blue, I've got Drag Under, Ingenious Scob. And then I also put Spontaneous Mutation on here as well. And the honorable mention went to the Enlightened Maniac. That's the O2 that brings in a 3/2. That's the one that I'm wondering about how often we're sacrificing things and emerging and that kind of stuff. And that one's not going to, I don't think it's going to hit the same level, but it's, again, one that kind of caught my eye. Ingenious Scob, Drag Under, Spontaneous Mutation. Do you have any sense for how those kind of break down?
Ingenious Scob looks to me like the best blue common overall. You don't need a lot of cards, spells to make it good. I mean, clearly in the blue-red spells deck, it's just much better because you can play 1 or 2 spells a turn. It's going to be great. You can just put this card in any of your deck. Your opponent doesn't know how many spells you have, so when you attack your Ingenious Scob into their 3/3, it's so great because you attack into their 3/3 on turn 4. If they block and you have a spell, you can blow them out, right? Like, imagine they block and you, like, Galvanic Bombardment their 2/2 and eat their 3/3 with your now 3/4 Scob. So clearly they're not going to do that. But if they block and you don't have a spell, you just pay a blue and trade the 2 cards. It's a bluff that really can't go wrong. A semi-bluff, if you will.
Indeed.
That's poker terminology, in case you didn't know.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Ingenious Scob is just great stats with 2 good abilities. So I think it's going to be the best one overall. Drag Under, I think, I have high hopes for as well, because Drag Under is interesting. So, you spend 3 mana, you probably make them spend more than 3 mana because you're going to want to bounce, 4-drop, 5-drop, whatever. You don't go down a card because you draw a card. So in a tempo deck, the card is exactly what you want, because let's say you have an Ingenious Scob out, maybe a 2-drop, and you Drag Under their 3-drop. That sounds pretty good.
That sounds amazing.
If you are playing a deck where spells matter, like you have Pyrohound, that seems also really good because you're just trying to, keep the board clear and trigger your spells matter cards. And then in a control deck even, it's the worst of these options, but you can still bounce their 5-drop for 3 mana and try to survive where your late game is better. So I think
you're also just getting incidental upside, right?
Yeah.
Like any equipment that they put on, any auras that they've put on, any of that kind of, if they emerge something or flip something, it's just like you can just sort of like break even as your worst case scenario, and then sometimes just get, you know, like very good upside, you know, for people that are willing to go for the creature auras or the expensive equipment or whatever.
Drag under existing at common does punish all those cards, so
Yeah,
you have to keep that in mind when you play those cards. And so blue has some kind of serious commons here. It's funny because none of them, they're not as obvious as, like, you know, red is galvanic bombardment and white is choking restraint. These are cards that's like, yeah, of course those are the best commons. Blue's best commons are a little more interesting to see how they play out. So I do think that we're going to see Scob and Drag Unders 1 and 2, but where exactly they're the best in is going to be interesting to find out, because that's less obvious.
Yeah, for sure. For black, you know, I put Boon of Emrakul and Olivia's Dragoon on there. Olivia's Dragoon being the one in a black 2/2 vampire that you can discard a card to give it flying until end of turn. You know, my thinking there is that they did put a decent amount of madness cards in this set, and there's still madness, of course, in shadows as well. So, you know, I think that the black-red vampire deck is very much alive and well in Eldritch Moon territory here, and Olivia's Dragoon is one of the better enablers at 2 mana with really no downside to it. And then you put Midnight Scavenger on the list as well.
I like Midnight Scavenger. So again, this is the 5 mana 3/3 that Gravediggers, it gets a creature from your graveyard into your hand that costs 3 or less. And Midnight Scavenger does two things. One is that it's a 5 mana 3/3 that draws you a card. It's not that hard to build a deck where you have, you know, 8 creatures that cost 3 or less, something like that. And in that case, this pretty reliably draws you an action card too. You're not drawing a land, right? You're drawing a creature. The other thing is, no one else at the table really wants Graph Rats. And if you meld Midnight Scavenger and Graph Rats, then you end up with, you know, a pretty awesome creature. Like, you end up, like, I think you're going to win the game when you meld a lot of the time. So what happens when you flip those two is you end up with Chittering Host, which is a 5/6 haste. And when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and Menace. So if they have 3 creatures out, all of a sudden they go from blocking 3 creatures to blocking 1 creature, and you're attacking with a 5/6 haste. So, and our creatures are +1/+0. So
yeah,
and you can, like, let's say you go from having like a random 2/2 on the board, and you draw Midnight Scavengers with 7 mana. You play it, get Graph Rats back, play it. It just goes off.
It goes off right now.
Right, at the beginning of combat.
Yeah.
So,
and I've seen it. I mean, it's happened like that.
I think it's a real thing.
They're both common, and that is not a pipe dream. Like, that does happen. Yeah.
And it's I think that's critical because, again, Graph Rats is a 2 mana 2 with no ability outside the meld. If you don't have Midnight Scavenger in your deck, you're really just not interested in Graph Rats.
No, you're really not. You'd have to be pretty bummed on 2 drops to be able to go for a Graph Rats.
So I think that Midnight Scavenger has a significant amount of value in both the raised dead ability and the meld ability. So I have that as competitive with the Dragoon, because if you're not playing a Madness deck, Dragoon is not anything particularly special. Yeah. It's okay in Delirium. It lets you get extra types in your graveyard if you really need to, but I think that Midnight Scavenger has some legs.
Okay. In red, I had Galvanic Bombardment as my best one, and then I also put Brazen Wolves on the list just because stats-wise it seems to really work well in the red deck. Then the big question mark card...
Are Brazen Wolves like some wolves that are hanging around brazing things, or are they... or what exactly is going on there?
BRAIS''N.
Brazen some brisket.
No, this is the 2/3 that gets +2/+0 when it attacks for just 3 mana. And then the other card that I'm starting to doubt and have a big question mark about is Alchemist's Greeting. This is the 5 mana, does 4 to a creature, and it has madness for 1 in a red. Look, there's not a lot to hate about that card, right? It's like, okay, removal spell with some nice upside of sometimes madnessing and really killing something. But I have to say, I've played the card a fair bit already, and I've found that if I'm not madnessing it, I'm really unhappy with it. Like, I'm wondering
it's just a bad reduce to ashes if you're not madness.
It's like really bad reduce to ashes. Like, it doesn't do what reduce to ashes does. You know, it only does 4 damage, and that actually misses some pretty significant things. So I'm wondering how madness centric that card, Alchemist Greeting, is actually going to be like kind of where I originally thought it was going to be, because I have it lower than before.
In a deck with madness, clearly it's a great card. Right? If half the time you can cast it, you're really happy with it. I think that it's one of the better commons because of that upside, but people are frequently going to put it in decks that have very few madness outlets or none, and it's just not going to perform there.
Yeah, I think you really do want to look at your madness count before you just go throwing that in. It's not quite the catch-all removal that it looks like. The other card that I really enjoyed was Thermo Alchemist. That's the 2 mana
Go through.
0/3. Yeah, and when you tap it, it does 1 damage to your opponent, and when you cast an instant or sorcery, you can untap it. It's also got Defender. But I got to say, I think the blue-red deck lives on. I had some touches of it in one of my decks. I was straight blue-red, and I wasn't like all in on spells, but I had a lot of them. And that Alchemist, I was like, whoa, like that card did work. So I think we're going to see Thermal Alchemist be a real card in the format as well. Build around, of course. In green, the card that's really stood out to me is Ulvenwald Captive. That's the 1 in a green 1/2 with Defender, and you can pay 7 mana to turn it into a 6/4 that taps for 2 colorless mana.
Yeah, it's monstrous, right? Is that it?
You and Owen both, huh? Yeah, something like that. But whatever, that card.
Well, 2 mana 1/2 that taps for a green is already a pretty good card.
It is, and I found that it gives you places to put. There's a lot of places to put mana in this set, and the cool part is that it's built in. It's a mana ramp spell that gives you a spell to ramp up to, eventually making it into the 4/6. I think like Prey Upon is also on my list, right? I think that card's still very good. But I think Ulvenwald Captive is going to end up being the best green common.
Interesting. My guess is Prey Upon still gets there, but overall Captive does seem very good to me.
Yeah, it's just overperformed for me in many scenarios, so I really like it. And then you put Backwoods Survivalists on here as well.
I think that's a fine card too. The 4-cost 4/3 that Delirium gets ++1 and trample.
Yeah.
It's the kind of card that it reminds me of Solitary Hunter from Shadows, where you kind of fill out the middle of your curve, and it's just like a meaty guy that later in the game has a little bit of extra utility.
Would you describe him as a beefer?
A beefer. Yes, if anything is called a beefer, that is a beefer.
Beefer flies. All right. Grapple with the Past. The 1 in a green instant that you mill 3 and then you get a land or a creature.
Yeah, it's Corpse True.
Your hand.
You can get a land also, which actually changes the card significantly.
It does. That card has really, cheap instant speed
and the fact that Delirium is a theme.
Delirium's still a theme. You get a card back. It can be a card that's already in your yard, or it can be one that you freshly milled. For the 2 mana, I found that's been a worthy investment. It holds its own. It's really been pretty decent for me. I don't think it's in that category though, as the top ones. It just doesn't have enough of an effect, but it is a pretty good card. All right, let's take a look at the uncommons now. There's some really powerful stuff. One of the ones that I really kind of have tagged as a possible mythic uncommon is Subjugator Angel. And that's the 6 mana 4/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you tap all your opponent's creatures, and sometimes you just win the game on the spot. That one looks a little scary to me. I think that card might be one of those, full on grown tests, like really, and then the game just ended and that was it.
I think this card's a little overrated. I think.
What don't you like about it?
I think that when you're behind, it is a pretty bad card.
And still 4/3 flyer, right?
Yeah, 6 mana 4/3 is just not a good defender.
No, it's not a great card when you're behind.
Yes, the card has times when it'll definitely win you the game, and yes, the card is a powerful card, so I'm not saying this card's crap, but I do think that the card... Some decks just not going to want this card. That doesn't seem to me like it fits the definition of a mythic uncommon.
Okay, fair enough.
A white control deck, I don't think wants this card. You're going to want to be... It's a great curve ender for aggressive decks. Like the top of your curve having this is a great way to win a lot of games. You'll steal games with this. You'll get your opponent to 7... and then they'll have 7 creatures out to tier 2, and then you're just like, play this, kill you.
Yeah.
But in games where they have removal spells or you have 1 creature in play, like this card just people I think are gonna not look at the downsides as much as they look at the upsides.
So. I just find that like 4/3 flying for 6 isn't what I want to pay, but when it just like wins me the game occasionally, it's like I'm willing to still to play a card that's like half a mana or a mana off of where I'd like to pay it, Like that's a serious upside to me.
Yeah, it is a real upside, and again, I'm just.
I think white lends itself to aggression, though. I'm not sure.
It does. I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, obviously, we'll find out like for certain, but from what I've seen, it does seem.
I've seen it does. Yeah.
Like that was the case in Shadows, and that I believe was going to continue on. One of the cards I want to talk about was Faith Unbroken.
Oh yeah.
This is a 3 to white +2/+2 aura, and then, when you play it, it exiles one of your opponent's creatures until Faith Unbroken leaves the battlefield. So
It's just like the swingiest card ever, or what?
yeah, this is high risk, high reward is what I have described in the notes.
Yeah,
Because
that's a good
that
way
is
to
what the
put it.
card is. If your opponent can't deal with Faith Unbroken, then you probably win the game because you have like a 4/4 or a 5/5 or bigger. Because if you put this on, like a 3/3 or a 4/4, you get something pretty gigantic, and you kill their best creature. Of course, it's an aura, so if they kill your creature, you're just down a card because their creature comes back. So it reminds me a little of Sower of Temptation for those who played with that card. That's obviously a little from a long time ago. Lauren Block, the 2 blue 2/2 flyer that steals a creature while it's in play.
What do you mean? I played it last night.
Well, yeah, if you play Cube, you play a lot of it. But Faith Unbroken is the kind of card where if they don't deal with it, I think you're going to win almost all the time. But if they do, then you're down a card. So it's got punishment, but I think the upside is worth it. I think this card's very good.
Yeah, I actually do too. When we talked about it on the set review, I was like, look, I don't like setting myself up to get 2-for-1, but if the answer is I can't 2-for-1 you, then okay, I win the game, then I'll do it, And it just, the funny part is that this does pose such an interesting question. It's like, do you have removal? And it's like, if no, I win. If yes, you win. And it's not going to play out quite that simply, but like it's approaching that. It's just insane how swingy that Faith Unbroken can be.
Yeah, this is a card that is going to win some games and going to lose some games, and it's going to win more games than it'll lose.
Yeah, another one that's on the list is Courageous Outrider, which is much more in the middle. It's a 4-mana 3 and a white for a 3/4 human scout. When it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal a human card from among them, and put it in your hand. The rest go on the bottom of your library in any order. This one is sort of the complete opposite of Faith Unbroken, right? It's like the card
Yes.
that like always delivers something for you and sometimes gives you upside.
It's the kind of card that if it's a 4-mana 3/4 draw human, like if you have enough humans that you almost always hit, then the card is great. It only takes 6 other humans before you have a 50-50 shot, and I would say that most white decks are just naturally going to have more than that. So I like Courageous Outrider. I think the card is quite good.
Did you hypergeometric that thing, or
I maybe I did.
I like it. In blue, as we move on to blue, it's interesting. The uncommons are much harder to grade in blue. I think that the Grizzled Angler that we talked about earlier, the one that taps to mill you for 2 and then you transform it, if you got a colorless creature card in your graveyard, I think that is going to be one that's going to hit the list in the right type of deck. I think Geist of the Archives is one that I want to be really good. I don't know if it is yet. I actually haven't gotten one. It's the 2 and a blue 0/4 Spirit with
just about to
Defender.
mention that.
Yeah, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you scry one. I mean, that card just seems really, really powerful to me. Just, in general, that's the kind of thing that you can do. And then we'll talk about that in a sec. The other one was Nabelgast Herald. That's the 2 and a blue 2/1 with flash and flying. It's a spirit. And when it enters the battlefield, or another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, you get to tap a creature an opponent controls.
Well, Nibelgast is just a great card. Like Nibelgast Herald is I think a high pick even if you're not spirits. Then when you are spirits, it becomes great. Because 3-mana 2/1 flash tap a creature with flying is already good. You're just going to play that card.
Yeah.
And
now, what about? Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you stack it up with other spirits, all of a sudden your opponent's never able to block.
Yeah, it's really annoying. And Flash really makes that nice too. You get that ability to tap down a creature pre-combat on their turn and still attack.
And then you combine it with Splinter Twin, and then, actually nothing really. But
there's no untapping here. But, the card that I really want to be great and the one that I'm excited about is Geist of the Archives. And I'm curious about your take on it.
So, 3-mana 0/4 that scries every turn, I think fits in every blue deck. So there's the blue-red spells matter deck. The card looks great there. It can shut off a 3-power ground attacker and get you what you want with scries. In the blue-white spirits, having this to hold up the ground and again smooth out your draws works even though you are an aggressive tempo deck. And in blue-green emerge or blue-black zombies or control, something along those lines, this card just seems fantastic. I mean I'm going to see how it works, but my first look at the card makes me want to put this in all the blue decks.
Me too. Also not flying.
Yes, it doesn't fly.
It does not fly, no. In black. So the one that just jumps off the screen as maybe just one of the best cards in the set, period, is Murder, right? 1 black, instant destroy target creature. Just has to be.
It's so funny because Murder is great. And don't get me wrong. You're going to take this card very highly. It's the best black uncommon and maybe one of the better uncommons overall. But Compare this to Doomblade that used to be
I know,
common.
man. I
It's so
know.
much worse than Doomblade.
I know. And Doomblade was common for a long time too.
Yeah, it is funny,
It is
but yeah,
crazy.
murder's great. I mean, you'll take it. Like, out of context, that could sound bad, but
You're gonna
but
run
what
for
can I say?
office in 15
I love
years.
murder.
Yeah. Always murder. Ruthless Disposal is one I have on the list, and I think that one's subject to change. I do not know. I think that the late game implications that you described earlier of giving two of your opponent's best creatures -13/-13 with a downside that you get to manage and set up for and figure out on your own, and sometimes will bite you, but often you'll be able to like I said, kind of set it up, is going to be one of those games where it's like, I was doing so great and I was so far ahead and now I'm going to lose, right? And it's because Ruthless Disposal got me out of it. I mean, it can kill 2 bombs, 2 huge creatures, whatever, but it's conditional. It really is. I mean, you need the card, you need a creature to stack, you need the 5 mana, and you need 2 targets. So it's like there's quite a bit going on there, but I think it is going to end up being on power level alone one of those cards that's just like, you're going to have your friends come up to you at a GP and be like, I was crushing my opponent and boom, Ruthless Disposal, and now I lost, right? And there's not that many cards that can get you out of that
Okay, the
situation.
card certainly has high upside. I will not
Yeah,
deny.
exactly. The other card that I have on the list sort of tentatively, but I haven't actually been able to play with yet is Haunted Dead, right? And Haunted Dead is the 3 and a black 2/2 zombie, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 spirit flying spirit token, and you can pay 1 and a black and discard 2 cards to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and then of course you're going to get another flyer out of the deal. Card just looks like a nice grindy value card. I just haven't had a chance to play it, but I think it's really good.
Haunted Dead looks awesome to me.
Yeah, it just looks
First of
really
all, you're
good.
paying 4 mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1 with flying, which is already pretty good. I think you would play that most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, you get to flash it back essentially, right? You get to cast it from your graveyard
Yep.
for 2 mana and 2 cards. The 2 mana is obviously very low cost. 2 cards, and it's not nothing, but getting to trade in 2 lands or two bad spells or a land and a bad spell, whatever, for a 2/2 and a 1/1's good.
Mm.
And then once you start looking at Madness and Delirium, the card just seems awesome. So I think Haunted Dead is going to be better than Ruthless Disposal,
Okay.
but worse than Murder if you're looking at like the black uncommons.
Okay. Interesting. Now, red. Oh my God. You know, when you break things down by color like this and sort of look at them in groups, the really good cards jump out and you start to notice how many there are. And red got hooked up. So the
And
one
they're all
that
burn spells. It just got a million burn.
they did, it just burns everything. The one that I have as the best is Incendiary Flow,
Yeah,
which is
it's
the
hard to
it's hard to
kind of
top this, right? 1 in a red sorcery that does 3 damage to a creature or player and it exiles the creature if it was dealt damage this way and dies. I mean, look, some of the other cards we're going to talk about have a much more unique take, you know, on a card. They attack from a bigger angle or whatever, but Incendiary Flow at 2 mana for 3 damage, even if it is sorcery speed, is just going to be too hard to replace, I think. So I think that's going to end up being your best red uncommon. But you know the card I absolutely love? Smoldering Werewolf. This card has been super good for me. It's 2 red for a 3/2 werewolf horror. And when it enters a battlefield, you get to do 1 damage to up to 2 target creatures. And then you can pay 4 red to transform it into Erupting Dreadwolf, which is the 6/4 that whenever it attacks, it does 2 damage to a creature or player. I got to say, there's a lot going on with this card, but I have been really impressed by it. I think it's going to end up being a real power uncommon for red.
Smaller Werewolf, it certainly is going to have its moments where you kill 2 creatures, but even when they don't have a ton of good targets, a 4 mana 3/2 that transforms into a 6/4 that deals 2 when it attacks, so it probably does eat something, seems pretty good. And it's hard. It's easy to find a way to make this work. You can also do something like attack your 2/2s into their 2 3/3s, and then snap them off with a Smoldering Werewolf post combat.
Totally. That happens. And then you're sitting there and your opponent's already bummed out because that happened. And you're like, land. And they're like, oh no, 1 more mana. And my opponent, and now my opponent can just flip this thing over, start attacking for big chunks of damage. It's hard to block with like multiple small creatures because it kind of shoots them down. If there aren't any good blocks for your opponent, you do 2 to them and you're representing 8 damage coming up their head. It's just really, really tough. I think the card's fantastic. Another card that stood out in red was Savage Alliance. That's the 2 in a red instant with Escalate 1. And you can do 2 damage to a creature, 1 damage to each creature target opponent controls, or give all your creatures trample.
Savage Alliance does a lot of damage.
I mean,
I
it
mean,
just feels like it's not that hard to set up a 2-for-1 of some sort with it. You're going to do, if you kick it for 4 mana, you're going to do 3 damage to one creature and 1 damage to every other creature your opponent controls. And sometimes you're going to be able to set up a scenario where you can just win as a
well,
result of that. But
yeah.
with the trample, if you've got
Yeah,
another
because
mana.
giving trample when all their guys already have a point of damage on them is means you did an extra 3 or 4 points of damage also.
Totally. And so that's something that's going to pop up. But, doing 3 damage to one creature and 1 damage to everything else means that you'll sometimes get an incidental 1 toughness creature and then do 3 damage to, an air quotes real creature and kill it. And that's an instant speed for only 4 mana. I am definitely sold on that. I think that card's going to, have a big impact on the format. The other card, and this is one that I really wanted to ask you about while we were doing the set review, because I think it's a really interesting one to try to grade. It's not easy to see, is Spreading Flames, which is 7 mana. Yes, 7 mana for, 6 and a red for an instant, and it does 6 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures.
Spreading Flames looks good to me. It's
I mean, it's
also
super powerful, right?
yeah, it's gonna be at least a 2-for-1 the vast majority of the time, right?
Yes.
It's not hard to pick off a 4/4 and a 2/2 or something along those lines. Sometimes you're going to get three, and the fact that it's an instant means you can combine it with combat to really have a good turn. So
Yeah.
it's 7 mana. I mean, it's hard to get past that.
I
My
know, that's the thing.
inclination is that this card is good, but I don't know how good.
Yeah, that's the thing. We know that the effect is very powerful, but 7 mana is a lot, so we'll keep our eye on that one. When it comes to green, oh man, we gave this a really high grade, and it certainly earned it so far. Clear Shot, the 2 and a green instant.
Dramoka's command.
Yeah, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, and again, a reminder, that's not a fight, that's a punch. So Clear Shot has been disgusting.
When your 3/3
times.
gets into combat with their 3/3, and you're like, clear shot, kill your 4/4, it's just like, ugh.
That's exactly what happened to me. I was playing actually against Ryan Spain, my original co-host for this show, and of course works at Wizards now. And man, he did that. He killed a non-blocking creature and got his creature above mine, and I'm just like, right, play around Clear Shot, right? Like I just, it's early in the format, and it's just like I'm still reading these cards again just to make sure exactly how they play out in a game, and Clear Shot is just devastating when it goes off. Another card I really like is Noose Constrictor. That's the 1 and a green 2/2 with reach. It's a snake.